Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. It's definitely a great pleasure to see a room full. The images of unspeakable desperation and suffering that we have seen in recent months in the media are a stark reminder that the survival and resilience of pastoralist communities in the Horn has been continually eroded. And this can be attributed to a number of factors, and including some context-specific factors, which is particularly the case for Somalia. But one key issue relates to pastoralist access to their natural resource base, and particularly with regards to water and grazing land, which are both of vital importance for a mobile livestock production system. Indeed, a key feature of pastoralist way of life is mobility. Pastoralists must move. It is an imperative for their survival. And they move across the rangelands in order to access water and pasture which is scattered, often across vast tracts of land, often across international borders. And they move, for example, to access wet or dry season grazing areas. They also move in order to strategically track nutrients, and as well as to avoid overgrazing. So we see how really livestock mobility is a key, plays a key role in rangeland management as well. Now, pastoralist institutional arrangements, or in other words, the rules, the norms, the principles that govern access to water and pasture have become increasingly eroded. And this, we can see, can be one of the reasons why pastoralist livelihoods in the region have been weakened. Now, the study that I am presenting today was undertaken by the Humanitarian Policy Group, the HPG, here at ODI, and was commissioned by CARE International as part of, as John was just saying, as part of ongoing work that the HPG has been doing in this region to support CARE International. And this study, which I co-authored together with Simon Levine, a research fellow at the HPG, really aimed to gain a better understanding of the formal, and here I mean state, and informal, indigenous, customary institutions, and key actors regulating and involved in natural resources activities in Kenya and Ethiopia border areas. And here I've put a map showing the locations that I visited in this part of the world. The pastoralist communities that live along this part of the border of the Kenya, between Kenya and Ethiopia, have long relied on rules to manage the range. And these customary rules are indeed many, and it must be said that they also differ between different ethnic groups. But today I would like to draw your attention particularly to one rule, which was also shared by roughly by all the groups, the three groups, which are Boran, Garri, and Gabra ethnic groups that inhabit these border areas. I'd like to briefly talk about access to land and to the natural resources found within it. Now, the pastoralists I spoke to very often used collective terms, if you want, saying, for example, our resources, we decide, we manage. And I think this is quite indicative of the fact that for pastoralist communities, the rangeland as a whole is perceived as one single economic resource that is communally owned. Even if in the study area, this vast tract of land, this rangeland, has been divided by the establishment of the international border in the 19th century. At the same time, however, different ethnic groups own or exercise control over specific territories and the natural resources found within it. Now, we have just seen how it is imperative for pastoralists to move around, again, to track, essentially, availability and quality of grazing land. But when they move, they inevitably enter into the territories that are the domain, that are controlled by other groups, and by other clans, by other sub-clans or ethnic groups. And these territories may well be found across the international border. So really, specific sets of rights have been developed, whereas members, for example, of one ethnic group or clan can negotiate, and these negotiations are usually the domain of elders, the right to move temporarily into the area under the domain or under the control of another ethnic group. As one Gabra elder mentioned, this is the pastoral tradition of sharing. We decide to grant access to our territory and the water and pasture found within it to others in need. Today they need us, tomorrow we will need them. So these rules of access are also premised on norms of reciprocity and mutual support. So essentially, for pastoralists, granting access to their territory is seen as insurance against the future. Now, the key points that I want to make here is that really the rangelands are not idle tracts or free land, open, where pastoralists randomly browse with their livestock in search of water and pasture, but rather specific rules and norms govern mobility and access to the rangelands. And another issue, which I think is sometimes given insufficient attention, is also the fact that natural resources management, mobility, and the social relationship of pastoralist communities in the area are interlinked. Now, the customary rules, one of which we have just seen, around natural resources management have long been under multiple pressure. Now, conflict in pastoralist areas, for example, is often attributed to competition over scarce resources. And indeed, it must be said that the existence of these customary rules, including those that regulate access and negotiations that we've just seen, do not automatically mean that pastoralists have always lived in an idyllic state of harmony. Indeed, conflict is a feature of pastoralist areas. So indeed, also pastoralists themselves end up breaking these customary rules. But at the same time, I think it is also important to realize that conflict can also be fueled by the lack of regard for customary institutions and elders' authority around natural resources management. Now, for example, one of the findings of this study is that in different areas, it appeared that government administrators at times have pressed pastoralists to adopt a more exclusionary approach to access natural resources. In other words, government administrators have at times advised, if you want, pastoralist communities not to share their resources with others. But this, we have seen, goes against the principles that govern access to the rangeland and against really the logic of the ecosystem where pastoralists are living. And ignoring or disregarding customary institutions and elders' authorities carries serious repercussions for the peace and stability of the area and ultimately for the economic prosperity of pastoralists. In one specific area, particularly in the past, this had resulted in inter-clan conflicts or tensions across the border with renewed incidences of livestock raiding, for example. So I think that it's important to emphasize that rather than looking at natural resources management purely in technical terms, it is also important to recognize the social and institutional arrangements that ultimately determine how rangeland users relate to each other. And I think there is also another key point to make here, with regards to the numerous peace initiatives that have been promoted in the area, also in the study area along the border of Kenya and Ethiopia, by a number of actors, particularly over the past decade. And these take the form of pastoralist gatherings, peace meetings in the bush. And I think a key question here is, to what extent in these peace initiatives, issues around the institutional arrangements around natural resources management are taken into account in these peace initiatives? To what extent these efforts really aim at understanding and restoring, if needed, customary arrangements that have broken down, for example, between bordering communities, to ultimately ensure that peace is indeed sustainable and that harmonious relationships are maintained. Now, I'd like to move to briefly looking at formal institutions. Now, at national level, in the national policy discourse of both Kenya and Ethiopia, pastoralism has long been surrounded, this is nothing new, by perceptions of economic efficiency and backwardness. The national policies of both countries have long prioritized sedentary agriculture. In both Kenya and Ethiopia, the land tenure security of pastoralists is weak. And for example, in Ethiopia, pastoralists effectively have no land rights, and they're merely seen as exploiting free land until the state chooses to take it away. Now, the lack of recognition of pastoralists' right to own their land and of the institutions that they use to actually manage their land has very often resulted in the expropriation of vital parts of the rangeland, usually the dry season reserves, for farming schemes, for example. But in this way, by extracting parts of the rangeland, inevitably the rangelands have been disrupted, and as has been disrupted the functioning of the ecosystem. And in a cross-border context, we can say that as things stand, really pastoralists migrating across the border in search of water and pasture appear to be in quite a precarious situation, because mobility appears to be more dependent on the whims of local administrators, of police, rather than on a sound policy and legal basis. So ultimately, there is no formal recognition of the cross-border nature of pastoralism and of cross-border exchanges and activities. Since the late 90s, external interventions have sought to strengthen customary institutions also in this area of the world. And a number of NGOs have established and supported cross-border committees. I spoke to members of these cross-border committees, basically in every location that I visited along the border. And so what are these cross-border committees? Well, I think they can be defined as they involve essentially local representatives of both states, so like, for example, village chiefs, and formal and customary, institutions such as elders. And they operate by really blending formal and informal rules and mechanisms in a hybrid structure. Some of those committees are significantly involved in natural resources management. Some of them, for example, have a good say with regards to access and use of the natural resources over a certain area. And some even pastoralists themselves have called them a modern solution or a modern approach to the management of the rangeland. Now, are they really a modern solution to the management of the rangeland? Or to be really, are they a new hybrid institution with authority over the rangeland? I think perhaps they might have a potential towards this effect, but I think as things stand, again, some key issues need to be highlighted. During the fieldwork and the analysis, it really became quite evident that little attention seemed to have been paid to issues of power and competing interests between different spheres of authority within this newly formed structure, or relatively newly formed structure. For example, it is quite difficult to see how customary representatives and formal representatives can really collaborate as equal partners. At the moment, these committees have no legal status, and their work is very much also limited to border areas. And it doesn't seem that they really have the leverage, the power, the ability to really influence upper levels of decision making and act as efficient, as powerful agents to protect and promote pastoralists' rights in the region. And finally, I think also issues of representation and accountability appear to be it seems that issues of representations and accountability would need to be better understood and addressed eventually. And I think this is particularly important if the issue of legal recognition of these cross-border committees is brought to the fore. If these committees are not accountable, or they're not representative of the interests of the pastoralist community as a whole, then obviously their legal recognition would pose certain problems, and it may risk as well to further weaken customary institution arrangements. Now, I'd like finally to come to some key recommendations that we have put forward and that have emerged from the findings of this case study. I think that there should be a full recognition, or a more explicit recognition, of the links between conflict and natural resources management in any initiatives really that are undertaken around natural resources management, and also in peace initiatives. What is needed, I think, is also a broad vision and strategy for supporting pastoralism in the region. And one that can also overcome the view that ultimately mobile pastoralism is a problem, is inefficient, and for which the solution is sedentarization. And regional bodies may play an important role in this regard. The governments of Kenya and Ethiopia would need also to establish policies which recognize and permit the cross-border nature of pastoralism. Securing land rights for pastoralists also to prevent the expropriation of the best parts of the rangeland, and also put the land rights of pastoralists on the same footing as those of farmers is also required. Coming to the cross-border committees, I think the roles, particularly by organizations supporting and establishing these structures, should be better understood. So their role, really, their functions, their issues regarding accountability and representation should be given more weight, as well as understanding really the development vision towards which they are working. And finally, I think that a key entry point for any intervention looking at supporting areas around natural resources management is important to keep in mind that to enhance the productivity of the rangeland, it is not sufficient to only take a purely technical perspective, but institutional arrangements, sharing arrangements, and social relationships of rangeland users should be understood and should be better understood and should inform any initiatives in this regard. Thank you.